Everything drowned that day. It wasn't the storm itself, though. There's nothing like a hurricane's winds whipping through the streets of a city to turn things upside down. The storm came and went, and then it began to rain hard. All that warm water from the Gulf of Mexico, which was running a fever like the water all over the planet, flew up into the sky and then poured down all over Louisiana. And then all that water flowed downhill to the lowest place, and that place was New Orleans, the city like a bowl carved into the earth's surface, where people lived below sea level. And the wall around the city that was supposed to keep the water out didn't keep the water out because the people who built it took the money meant for the construction and cheated the ones who lived there. They took all the money and built a flimsy little wall that couldn't stand up to much. And so all the water flowed downhill until it came to streets filled with houses, and then it flowed right up all the front yards, making its way up the walkways framed with monkey grass, until it came to a doorstep. And then it slid between threshold and door to enter the house. It soaked the moss-colored carpeting and spread in a silvery puddle until it had touched every corner of the room, and all the other rooms as well. And then the water began to swell and climb up the walls 1 inch at a time, taking possession of the wallpaper with its tiny gold pineapples, hesitating at the windowsills and then hopping above them, so that the water was soon able to look out the window at its own mirror image rising up on the far side of the glass. And then all the windows showed a strange underwater landscape, paved streets resting on the ocean floor, and within the house chairs and tables bobbing on an unfamiliar tide until waves lapped at the ceiling. Tell me another story about the fire. The skin on grandmother's arms is like paper. Her face is all creases, but the blue of her one good eye is clear. The other is like wax. After the fire, she says, we lived in tin huts for 3 years and made roads with our bare hands. They were the only tools we had. I stare at my grandmother's fingers, which are slowly twisting moss green yarn around the blunt tips of her needles and the yellow light slipping under the eaves. Around the edges of the porch, glossy black strands of ivy slither and curl. I can see the big swamp mosquitoes carving out arabesques around the lantern hung between the river oaks, but they leave us alone because she's cast a spell on them. Grandmother's knuckles are thick with age and crack louder than her needles when she turns the knitting upside down at the end of each row. When she rocks her chair, it smells of beeswax and honey. My grandmother was born in a place where they speak another language. I went back to find her. I always knew what the past was. It was something you learned about at school, a collection of numbers and names and hard facts that could be written up in outline form and memorized before the exam. It was old newsreel footage in the basement of the university library and endless strips of microfilm containing the images of newspaper pages that had long since crumbled into dust. The past was concrete, objective, and omnipresent. At least, that's what it was to me before this year began. This was the year in which everything changed. Grandmother is a young woman, hardly older than me, and is walking in the woods somewhere in Middle Europa, looking for mushrooms, perhaps. The trumpet-shaped flutes of the black chanterelle nestled among the fallen leaves, an almost perfect camouflage. It is a warm day in late autumn, and she has paint on her hands and is dressed in some sort of smock with pants, garb more suited to a boy. Nonetheless, you can see how pretty she is with her delicate features and the huge mane of hair tied back at the nape. There will be mushrooms for dinner if she can find some, and her widowed mother and little brothers will exclaim with pleasure when they come home and smell the mushroom fragrance filling the apartment from the kitchen. Her parents, who have been lying in bed all week with some sort of influenza, will shout from the other room that she shouldn't have gone to so much trouble. Her two sisters, the little one and the big one, will come into the kitchen to help her cook, one of them chopping the onions, a task she hates, the other carefully flicking the dirt from each mushroom with a rag while she climbs up on a chair to take down the big frying pan hanging on the wall to heat the butter. Her father will cook the mushrooms when he gets home from work. He's the family mushroom specialist and always adds a pinch of Hungarian paprika or Persian saffron to the bit of broth he pours into the pan so that the mushrooms will stew and fry at the same time. She'll hurry down to the market square before dusk to sell the fresh mushrooms spread out on a sheet of newspaper on the cobblestones, and then use the money to buy a piece of liver to fry for her elderly aunt who lives with her, whose blood is thin. Grandmother is telling me a bedtime story in our house in Gentilly. She says one day, an old man walked out of the bayou and knocked on our door. Bayou St. John? I ask. That's right, she says. He was dressed in alligator skins and asked for pen and paper because he had something to write down he was afraid of forgetting. For an afternoon, an evening, an entire night, and then the morning of the following day, the man sat and wrote. He shooed away anyone who attempted to speak to him by raising one elbow, and he wouldn't stop to eat even after my grandfather fried a plate of andouille and set it down on the dining table beside the legal pad the man was filling, line after line, with tidy block letters. He didn't look up. This was before my mother was born. After the man had finished writing, he tore off all the yellow pages he'd filled, rolled them up tightly and tucked them inside his shirt, next to his heart. Grandfather asked him what he had written. "It's my history," the man said. "I was afraid of forgetting it." Then he took off down the sidewalk, barefoot.
Susan Bernofsky.
Thank you.
Beautiful.